Hey, I'm back. So I guess I did it. Episode 2 of the vlog. So last week I introduced this new project. I'm making a movie. It's about two guys who go on a journey to create the perfect drug, and disaster ensues. So in the last week, I've started writing the first draft of my new script. I love first drafts. It's the best time to get out all of your new ideas, sketch out your characters, any scenes that you've been dreaming about. Generally, first drafts are too long, especially my first drafts in the past. And there's good reason to make an indie script shorter, as short as possible, really. The script is the foundation for everything you do after this. The script really is the roadmap for production and post-production. Everything you put in the script, you have to shoot, you have to edit. So when you're working on such a tight budget and timeline, having a shorter script means that you can focus more on what you do have on the page. If you have a 90-page script and you're shooting that in 30 days, you have to shoot 3 pages a day. And while that doesn't sound like a lot, most commercials shoot about 30 seconds a day. The feature films that I've worked on are usually shooting somewhere between 4 to 6 pages a day. And that's really where I'd like to stick. If possible, I'd love to do less. However, on this particular script, I've run into a problem that I've never had before. It's too short. Last week, in the first 3 days of writing, I wrote 30 pages, about 10 pages a day. One of those days I wrote 15 pages, which I think is an all-time record for me. That's not necessarily a good thing, but it's also not necessarily a bad thing. One thing that's helping me, I think, write this a little faster is that I've written this script a few different times before. It's been very different, but I'm pulling some of the character and plot details from earlier drafts into this one. And while things were going really fast early on, in the past few days, things have slowed down a lot. So after 3 days of writing, I looked back at the 30 pages and realized that I was already pretty deep into the second act by page 19-20, which is not supposed to happen. Now, I'm not one to stick to formula, but I also love the movies I love, and by and large, they all stick to somewhat of the hero journeys format. From One Flew Over a Cuckoo's Nest to Amadeus to, I don't know why I'm sticking to Milos Forman films. I think he just died, may he rest in peace. But the point is, even some of these films that you don't think are the Marvel, the Jurassic Park, Steven Spielberg's, kind of the classic Hollywood formula, even they develop their characters and develop their plot in a traditional sense, largely because that's how life is lived. The way we experience ups and downs, the way we grow, the conclusions we finally come to when we're at the end of those journeys, that's how we deal with emotion and experience. And so I want to relate this story in a way that people can really connect to, so that people can put themselves in the shoes of these guys and explore the ideas that I want to explore in this film. A 60-minute film just doesn't give me the time to develop this stuff. So it must mean that either I'm not developing enough, or the plot points that I've done so far are really just that first act, and I need to keep this thing moving. So I'm in kind of a place that I've never found myself in before. In the past, I've always outlined pretty closely and stuck to that in the first draft. Well, now I'm realizing that I'm halfway into my outline, but only a third of the way into my film. The outline for this movie, by the way, you can find on the website, link here, or maybe just down below in the comments. Is that how we do it? So check around and you'll be able to find the outline. I'm going to be putting up all of the materials for this movie, each draft of the script, outlines as it changes, the storyboards. So if you want to look through any of what I'm doing, you can find it here. I could either go back to the outline and try and flesh out some character moments earlier in the film, throw in a couple plot points earlier to try and skew things, to try and stretch myself to get to that second act, or I can just say this is the story as it's unfolding naturally and see where it leads me and see if I really do end up at 70 pages or if the story continues developing on its own. I'm gonna see where this story takes me. Let me go back and walk you through some of the synopsis of the film. In the beginning of the film, we meet two best friends. Merrick, this vagabond type who's clinging on to kind of this fun past that he's had with his best friend, Anuj. Anuj is a brilliant biochemist who has taken his love of psychedelic drugs and experimented with it on the side. We meet the characters when they're almost finished creating this perfect drug, this psychedelic drug that should roll all of their favorite experiences into one. Well, for Anuj, this is meant to only be an experiment. But after they test it out on a rat, Merrick, without telling Anuj, also takes the drug. The next morning, they wake up and the rat is missing from its cage, which was locked. Anuj doesn't think much of this, but Merrick realizes that he might be in a lot of trouble. That night, they go to a rave, but the two end up getting separated and Merrick disappears. Finally, he returns back to the garage and to this clandestine laboratory Breaking Bad setup, where he finds a camcorder that Merrick was using to record all of their activities. And in the camcorder, he sees Merrick taking this drug. Anuj freaks out and tries to figure out what happened and gets rid of all of the evidence. Meanwhile, the rat appears back in his cage. So Anuj wonders if Merrick is going to return as well. He calls a professor he's close to back at school to walk him through this. The professor has concerns, but he's interested in the work, and so the two work together to try and reverse engineer what Anuj did to find out what went wrong. Before hanging up, the professor commits to helping Anuj. Afterward, Merrick returns, making Anuj think that everything's okay. In the outline, this was the midpoint of the film. So here's where the logic in plot and character motivations and the way that those character motivations motivate the plot come in. The problem I was running into was that between Merrick's disappearance and when he came back, there wasn't enough for Anuj to be dealing with. If you're this guy who had just created this drug, which you thought either caused your friend to go insane and to be lost in the wilderness or to be dead, wouldn't you just dispose of this? So there are a few things that Anuj does. He goes to the cops, but he turns back when he gets cold feet. He returns home to reconcile with his parents, which doesn't go well. And then he returns back to the lab to try and walk back through his steps to figure out what went wrong. But at some point, he realizes that this is a crime, gets rid of the evidence, and then we're just waiting for something else to happen. So instead of filling that with fluff and trying to extend my plot points so that they match up with Hollywood's formula, I've realized, okay, well, that's what happens. So it's going to happen earlier in the second act, and I'm going to have my main two characters for the rest of the film, which is probably as it should be. This is a buddy film. This is about a friendship between two guys who are growing up. One has a bright future ahead of him and the other doesn't. Essentially, this is a film about growing in friendship or losing connection with each other. How do we give up those important relationships that helped us grow into the people that got to this point? Are they still relevant to our future lives? So now I need to figure out what is the rest of this film? How do they deal with that? On the one hand, that's really exciting. I'm in uncharted territory and I can really follow this thing where it's going. On the other hand, without clear ideas of where I want the plot to go, my character motivations can devolve into a series of conversations, which is really not what cinema is about. There's an old maxim that says, show, don't tell. And what I don't want to do is have these characters duke it out through a bunch of conversations and arguments verbally, so you're just hearing them say what they're thinking. For example, later in the film, Merrick's body starts to deteriorate. Well, it's much less interesting to have him tell Anuj, I think I'm dying, or I'm not going to make it. The more interesting scene is to see it. How is his body deteriorating? Why is he dying? So the good news is that this is just a first draft. I expect to be doing 3 to 5 revisions somewhere in there on this film before I have something that I can shoot. So that gives me some opportunities. One, I don't need to fix everything now. I can put my best ideas forward and try to get the logic working as well as possible. In my first couple of screenplays, taking that outline to the first draft, it was so vivid that it was hard to reimagine the ideas that I had put forth in that first draft. But since then, I've learned that revisions are actually a lot of fun too, and that's where the real work is done. Once I finish this first draft, I need to put it out there and get feedback. And I'm hoping that when I put this script up, that some of you will read it and give me your feedback. Tell me nobody would ever do that, or this plot point didn't work for me. That kind of feedback is really key to know where to go in the revisions. If you'd like to help, I'll be putting the full first draft up on the website in the next coming weeks when I finish. If my current pace keeps up in this ever slowing trend, it might be a couple more weeks until I have a good first draft, but I'll let you know when that is. Until then, hit all those likes and shares, and here's a box with a puppy in it.